This morning wasn't about headlines or theatrics. It was about reality crashing into a myth. Federal marshals didn't show up for a photo op. They didn't come for a raid. They didn't come for an arrest. They came for a seizure, a court-ordered seizure, the kind that happens when someone ignores the law long enough that the law stops asking politely. This wasn't drama. This was enforcement. Cold, procedural, legal, and unavoidable. For years, this individual built an image of being untouchable, immune to rules, immune to courts, immune to consequences. Today shattered that illusion. Let's be honest for a moment. This doesn't feel real to people because we're not used to seeing power meet accountability. We're used to seeing delays, loopholes, lawyers, appeals, excuses, and endless deflection. We're used to seeing money act like armor. So when people hear federal marshals and court-ordered seizure, their first reaction is disbelief. It sounds exaggerated, it sounds unreal, it sounds like something out of a movie, but this is real life, and this is how the legal system works when someone keeps refusing to comply with court orders. This wasn't a surprise. This didn't come out of nowhere. This was built step by step, case by case, judgment by judgment. Courts ruled. Juries decided, evidence was heard, verdicts were issued, debts were legally created, and every single time the same response followed: delay, deny, don't pay. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. That's not confusion, that's not misunderstanding, that's not legal complexity, that's strategy. And when that strategy runs out of road, enforcement begins. Here's what people need to understand in plain language. A judgment is not a suggestion, it's not a recommendation, it's not a political opinion. It's a legal debt. Once a court enters a judgment, that money is owed. Legally, formally, enforceably. Appeals don't erase it. Public statements don't erase it. Media narratives don't erase it. Influence doesn't erase it. The only thing that satisfies a judgment is payment or enforcement. And that's where this crossed a line into something bigger. Not just because of the property, not just because of the money, but because of the pattern. Multiple cases, multiple courts, multiple rulings, multiple judgments, same behavior every time: stall, delay, appeal, avoid, refuse. This wasn't one dispute. This was a system of avoidance. Now, here's the part people don't like to hear, because it removes the drama and replaces it with reality. This is not political persecution. This is not targeting. This is not special treatment. This is standard civil enforcement law. This is the same process used when someone refuses to pay a court judgment anywhere in the country. If a business owner loses a lawsuit and refuses to pay, assets get seized. If a corporation defaults on a legal judgment, property gets liquidated. If an individual ignores court orders, the court enforces them. That's how the system works. The law doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about status. It doesn't care about power. It doesn't care about fame. It cares about two things: debt and assets. If a court says you owe money and you don't pay, the court authorizes the seizure of assets to satisfy the debt. Period. That's why this property mattered. It's not classified as a protected personal residence. It's registered as a commercial asset, a business property, a club, a revenue-generating operation. And legally, that changes everything. Commercial assets don't get the same protections. They're not shielded. They're not exempt. They're subject to enforcement, which means seizure isn't symbolic, it's procedural. And here's the reality people avoid talking about. Seizure doesn't mean instant sale, but it starts a clock. Valuation, appraisal, legal filings, court supervision, negotiations. And if the debt remains unpaid, liquidation becomes the end point. Not as revenge, not as punishment, as math, as accounting, as legal obligation. What makes this moment different isn't the property value, it's the message. Judgments are not optional. Courts are not suggestions. Rulings are not theoretical. The system either enforces its own orders or it collapses into theater. Because think about what happens if this kind of behavior becomes normal. If people with enough money can just ignore judgments, delay forever, and never face enforcement, then civil court becomes meaningless. Lawsuits become symbolic. Verdicts become decorative. Justice becomes performative. And the system only works for people who can't afford to resist it. Civil courts are the backbone of everyday accountability. Contracts, fraud, defamation, business disputes, personal harm. This is how society resolves conflict without violence. You don't settle these things in the street, you settle them in court, but court only matters if rulings mean something, if enforcement exists, if consequences are real. If someone can lose in court and just refuse to comply indefinitely, then the entire structure breaks. Not for the rich, for everyone else. Small businesses, workers, families, regular people, the people who rely on the system to protect them when they're wronged. That's what this moment exposes. Not just a property seizure, not just unpaid judgments, not just one individual. It exposes the stress test of the system itself. Because real accountability isn't loud, it isn't emotional, it isn't dramatic, it's paperwork, it's filings, it's writs, it's court orders, it's marshals showing up quietly and doing their job, it's the boring machinery of law doing exactly what it was designed to do. And now the process is in motion. Valuations will happen, legal filings will follow, negotiations may occur, payments may happen, settlements may be attempted, or delays may continue. But the direction is set. The system has moved from orders to enforcement, and that's a line you don't uncross easily. This isn't about humiliation. It isn't about spectacle. It isn't about headlines. It's about consequence. It's about the difference between power and accountability. It's about whether the law functions the same for everyone or only for people without the resources to fight it. Because the truth is simple and uncomfortable. A justice system that can't enforce its own judgments isn't a justice system at all. It's just paperwork. And now we're watching in real time whether the system holds, not in theory, not in speeches, not in slogans, but in action. This is what accountability looks like when it stops asking and starts enforcing. No noise, no spin, no theater, just the law doing what it was built to do. And here's the part people keep missing. Enforcement isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of the reckoning. Once the system moves from court orders to asset control, everything changes. The conversation stops being about arguments and starts being about numbers, about valuations, about liquidity, about leverage, about reality. Power doesn't matter anymore. Paperwork does. Influence doesn't matter. Court authority does. Reputation doesn't matter. Asset classification does. Because once enforcement starts, every move becomes transactional. Properties are no longer symbols, they're line items. Accounts are no longer private, they're records. Assets are no longer trophies, they're collateral. This is where myths die and spreadsheets take over. And make no mistake, this process doesn't slow down because someone is famous. It doesn't stop because someone is powerful. It doesn't pause because someone is controversial. Courts don't operate on emotion. They operate on procedure. Once enforcement begins, the system moves forward unless the debt is satisfied. That's the rule. That's the structure. That's the mechanism. This is the phase where people try to control the narrative. They call it persecution. They call it targeting. They call it political. They call it unfair. They call it biased. But none of that matters legally. Courts don't enforce opinions. They enforce judgments, and a judgment is just a legal fact, a number on paper backed by authority. What's unfolding now is not chaos, it's bureaucracy. Slow, methodical, relentless bureaucracy. Appraisers don't care about ideology. Clerks don't care about politics. Marshals don't care about branding. They care about documents, orders, signatures, filings, and compliance. This isn't dramatic, it's mechanical. And that's why this moment is uncomfortable for people to process. We're used to seeing power operate through spectacle, through noise, through dominance, through control of attention. But the legal system doesn't work that way. It works through silence, through procedure, through paper, through process, through steps that don't look dramatic but carry real force. And the deeper truth is this: enforcement isn't punishment, it's substitution. If money won't move, property will. If funds won't transfer, assets will. If payment won't happen voluntarily, it happens structurally. That's how civil law is designed. It doesn't beg, it replaces. So now the options narrow: compliance, settlement, payment plans, negotiation, or escalation. But avoidance stops working. Delay stops working. narrative stops working because enforcement doesn't respond to messaging, it responds to math. And this is where leverage shifts, not emotionally, legally, structurally, financially, because once assets are under court authority, control weakens. Freedom of movement shrinks, flexibility disappears. Every decision becomes reactive instead of strategic. Every delay becomes more expensive. Every appeal becomes riskier. Every move becomes constrained by court supervision. And this is what people misunderstand. Enforcement isn't fast, but it's heavy. It doesn't rush, but it doesn't stop. It doesn't explode. It suffocates, slowly, quietly, legally. And that's why this matters far beyond one case or one person. Because if enforcement fails here, it sends a message that judgments are optional for the powerful, that wealth can outlast the law, that delay equals immunity, that resources equal escape. But if enforcement holds, it sends the opposite message, that no matter how big the name is, no matter how loud the influence is, no matter how strong the branding is, the system still works the same way for everyone when it comes to debt. And that's the real test. Not whether someone argues, not whether someone appeals, not whether someone complains, but whether the system enforces anyway. Because law without enforcement is theater. Justice without consequence is performance. Courts without power are decoration. And systems collapse not when laws are broken, but when laws are ignored without consequence. This is the pressure point. This is the friction zone. This is where theory meets reality. Now every move matters, every filing matters, every court response matters, every delay matters, every negotiation matters, because the system has shifted from discussion to execution, from argument to enforcement, from debate to procedure, from narrative to action. And once that shift happens, the story changes permanently. This isn't about a property. This isn't about a personality. This isn't about headlines. This isn't about politics. This is about whether the legal system still has teeth when it's tested by power, because accountability only means something when it's applied upward, not just downward. When it's enforced on the powerful, not just the powerless. When it holds those with resources, not just those without them. That's the real question unfolding now. Not who's angry, not who's loud, not who's spinning the story, but whether the system does what it was built to do. Because if it does, then the message is clear. Judgments matter. Courts matter. Enforcement matters. The law still functions. And if it doesn't, then the message is darker. That money outruns accountability. That power overrides consequence. That justice is conditional. And once a society accepts that, the system doesn't break loudly, it rots quietly from the inside out. And that's why this moment matters. Not as spectacle, not as drama, not as entertainment, but as a test of whether the system still means what it claims to mean. Because this is what real accountability looks like when it stops being symbolic and starts being structural, slow, silent, relentless, legal. And once it starts moving, it doesn't need noise. It just needs time.